Hey, how much candy do you have?
I counted 42 pieces in my bag.
Oh, I only counted 41 in mine. Oh, I wish I had 100 pieces of candy. Or 1,000. Ooh, 1,000,000 candies. Or 1,000,000,000. Or 1,000,000,000,000. Or a quadrillion. Or a bazillion. Or 90,000 million quintillion 100,000 infinity pieces of candy.
Ugh, you're just making stuff up. Some of those aren't even real numbers. This otherwise important conversation just became meaningless. I'm out of here.
Ooh, how about a Googleplex of candy?
Huh? What? Did you just say Googleplex? Because you know what? That's a real number.
We often exaggerate for good reasons. We may want to strengthen a concept or truth to someone's mind through exaggeration.
All good points, bro. I have to admit, your mathematics are sound.
Thanks. What I'm saying is that even though a Googleplex is beyond our comprehension, it at least represents a real numerical value.
Yeah.
Those other made-up numbers sounded big, but by exaggerating, you diminished the very thing you were trying to describe because they weren't based in what's true, unlike a Googleplex, Graham's number, or Tree 3.
Right?
When it comes to candy, those numbers mean something.
Oh, I totally get what you're saying. You're saying that would be like a lot of candy.
So much candy.
While overemphasizing something can help our communication at times, overstating something can also detract from the very point we're trying to make if we take it too far. We can end up confusing the point, even if we do it for all the right reasons.
Come on down to Radical Burger and try our new bigger burger. It's better because it's bigger. Warning, consuming Radical Burger, bigger burger makes and or death.
Exaggerate a thing beyond reality, and you may just remove that thing's very purpose or identity.
Ooh, that burger does look good. That wasn't what I expected. Yeah, I can't even fit that in my mouth.
Making a thing bigger
Is this even a real burger?
does not necessarily make it better,
I have crippling regret right now.
and stretching a claim beyond what is true does not always make it more convincing.
Can someone let me out, please? This bigger burger is going to kill me!
The same holds true when we describe theological ideas. When describing man's moral depravity, anything less or more than what is true creates confusion. Underemphasizing man's sin and guilt is unbiblical and dangerous. Yet, sometimes an exaggeration of the nature of sin pushes it far beyond the facts of reality. And as a result, the idea of man's moral guilt and conviction can become lost. Not only does exaggerating the definition of sin make it less convicting, but by going beyond what is true about sin, sin is stripped of the moral ugliness by which it deserves to be understood. Total depravity, also called total inability, is the doctrinal opinion that man can naturally do nothing but sin. What is meant by this is that every aspect of man's nature is so corrupted by sin that man's will can only choose sin and is impotent or unable to choose otherwise. This concept of sin holds that sin has totally corrupted every part of man's mind, even including man's natural ability to obey or disobey God. Perhaps one reason this idea continues to be held comes from a good desire to emphasize the evil of sin and demonstrate the magnitude of man's guilt. After all, apart from God, sinful man has become totally committed to selfishness and sin. And without a doubt, man's guilt is great, because man has the God-given ability to choose good over evil. But this is not a problem of a lack of free will ability. Instead, man is guilty because of his willful abuse of his free will ability. Human history and our own experience confirms what the Bible teaches. Sin is bad. sin is morally evil. Sin hurts the sinner. Sin robs the world of potential good. And worst of all, sin breaks God's heart. Man's sin is so criminally vile that man could not possibly have been saved without the suffering and shed blood of God's own Son. Every sinner deserves to be punished for their own sin, and God would be unjust to not hold moral criminals responsible for their choices. Responsibility, ability to respond. The meaning is literally right there in the word. Man has the ability to respond, and it is for this reason that man is accountable for his moral actions. Culpable, accountable, answerable, liable. Words like these apply to moral beings who are actually able to choose between right and wrong. However, if a being were to lack the ability to make real, self-determined choices between good and evil, then that being would cease to be a moral being. If you lack the ability to make creatively free moral choices, you aren't a moral creature. And God's moral law only applies to moral beings. In other words, a person can't be responsible, culpable, or accountable for their choice if there is only one possible action to be carried out. In fact, we don't even really use the word choice for an action when no other course of action exists. Moral choices exist only where moral options exist. If man can only choose to sin, then sin is not a moral choice. Again, if man lacks moral agency, then man is not a moral creature. If a shark eats another shark, we say that's natural. If a shark eats a man, we call it a tragedy. However, if a man eats a man, we call that a crime and hold the offender morally culpable, responsible, and ultimately guilty. We call it a crime because any reasonable person knows better and could have chosen differently. But it doesn't enter our mind to call a shark guilty for snacking on beachgoers, because sharks just act according to their God-given shark nature. Sharks don't reason between moral options. Sharks follow their shark instincts. Sharks can't choose otherwise. If man can't choose otherwise than to sin, then man is not morally guilty. If man can only act according to his nature and can't make creatively free moral choices, then man is not a moral criminal, but would instead be a victim of his nature. The Apostle Paul recognized that all of mankind is without excuse for their sin. But if man's nature is corrupted in such a way that every aspect of his being can only choose sin, then man actually has a perfect excuse before God for man's actions. The bottom line is, the sinner is not unable to believe and obey God. The sinner is simply unwilling to obey God. We must truthfully communicate the concept of sin and reasons for man's guilt. An exaggeration of less or more than what is true can defeat the identity and purpose of the gospel message to a sinful world that desperately needs saving. Exaggerating the description of sin, even for the right reasons, hides its true identity and gives the sinner the perfect excuse to continue in rebellion. Truthfully, when it comes down to it, sin is exceedingly sinful because you actually could have chosen otherwise.